Well, hello there, good people. David Taub here again, coming to you from nextlevelguitar.com. And you should have just learned a bunch of seventh chords, or dominant sevenths. Those are the chords with the 7 after the name of the chord, like you've learned or went to the chord library and should have learned A7, B7, C7, D7, E7, and G7, okay? And now I want to give you some practice progressions using those sevenths chords, and also some good songs maybe you might want to try that has seventh chords in them, or a seventh chord variation that you might want to add to your catalog of songs. Songs like Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel. That's a nice cool strumming song with a couple of seventh chords in it. Hey Jude by the Beatles. Margaritaville, Jimmy Buffett, has a nice seventh chord. So those are songs well within your grasp at this point in your guitar journey that I suggest you try and to get used to these seventh chords. And another thing I want to give you for the seventh chords right now is I want to give you a few practice progressions using just seventh chords, okay? And maybe we'll do a little bluesy progressions. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a 1-4-5. And you might have heard of that term, you might not have. If not, we're going to get into it very big in the future. But basically what we're going to do is, in a certain key, we're going to take the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord in that key. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. We'll get to it. But basically we're going to play that in a certain progression or amount of times on each chord. Okay? We're going to do it in a few different keys, and this is going to give you great practice with your seventh chords. Let's start in the key of E. So what we're going to do is we're going to play an E7, which you should have learned. Right, remember, these are bluesy and twangy. The next chord will be an A7, which is the 4 chord in the key of E. Okay? And then we're going to go to the B7, which is the 5 chord. Okay. Now the pattern we're going to play this in is going to be a pattern you're going to need to know. We're going to spend a lot of time on this pattern later. I'm going to draw it all out for you in future lessons or DVDs. But basically we're going to play like a 12-bar pattern. You might have heard this called 12-bar blues, where we're playing a certain amount of measures on each chord, and that just keeps repeating. And one time around, completely all the chords equals 12 measures. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay on the first chord, the E, for 4 measures. Then we're going to go to the A7th for 2 measures. Then we're going to go back to the E7th for 2 measures. Then we're going to go to the B7 for 1 measure, to the A7 for 1 measure, back to the E7th for 1 measure. And then we could do what's called a turnaround, where we're going to turn back around and go back to the B7. Good turnaround chord would be the 5 chord for 1 measure. Okay? You could write that down in this way, because you're going to remember that. You want to memorize that, and it'll come very quickly. And in fact, when I start playing it, you'll probably be like, oh, I know that. I've heard that before. 1-4-5s are very common. In fact, so much music is built off of the 1, the 4, and the 5 chord. So what we'll do is we'll just use a strum that you know, maybe like a down, down, up, down, up. But let's put a chuck into it to make it more interesting. Now, you should have watched the module also in this DVD or near this lesson module on chucking open chords. These are all open chord 7ths that we're using. So let's just do that. Down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, up. Or you can do 2 chucks. Down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck. So we're chucking on the first, the second downstroke, and we could, or if you want to do 2 chucks, you can do the down chuck, up, down, down. I'm sorry, we're doing down, down, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, down. Okay? Remember that strong right hand muted percussive chuck. So we're doing strum 2, down, down, up, down, up, and we're doing down, then a down chuck. Up, down, up. And if you're good at the chucking, you could try to put 2 chucks in. Do down, and then a down chuck, and then your 2 ups, up, and then another down chuck. And it'll sound like this. Again, I'm on E7. Down, chuck, up, chuck, up, down, chuck, up, chuck, up, down, up, down, up, chuck, up, down, up, chuck, up, down. Okay? So that's the strum we'll use for this exercise. And we're going to go from the E for 2 measures. Actually, we're going to go on the E for 4 measures. And then we'll go to the A for 2, back to the E for 2, to the B for 1, to the A for 1, A7, these are all 7th chords, A7 for 1, and then back to the E7 for 1, and to the B7 for the turnaround. So it'll sound like this. I'll do it slow. Start off on the E. 1 measure, 2 measures, 3 measures. Change A7 for 2 measures, E7. Now you gotta get to that B7, A7, E7. Turn around. Back to D7. 2, 3. Change to A7. Isn't this fun? E7. Here comes that B7. A7. E7. Turn around. I turned around on the B7 and I just did all downstrokes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then back to your E. Okay, so that's basically called a 1-4-5 12 bar blues. We're using all 7th chords to practice our 7th chords, to practice our chucking, to practice our timing, to practice our 12 bars, and to practice our 7s and our chord changing. And do it slow at first. Play along with me. A7. Back to E7. Now we're going to go to that B7. A7, 1 measure. E7, 1 measure. Turn around. Start all over again. E7 for 4. Yeah, A7. Back to the E7, the 1 chord. Now we're going to go to the 5, the B7. A7 for 1, E7. Turn around on the B7. Start all over. So you keep rolling that same changes over and over and over. 12 bars. If you look at all the amount of measures we spent, 4 measures on the E, 1 measure, 2 measures on the A7, 2 measures on the E7, 1 measure on the B7, 1 measure on the A7, 1 measure back to E7, 1 measure for the turnaround, that equals 12. And that's how you get 12 bar, or 12 measures. You probably heard this 12 bar blues. There's also 8 bar blues. That means you're staying on the whole chords before it repeats for 8 measures. Okay? 12 is probably the most common. So that's it in the key of E. Right? And that gives you that practice. So I want you to practice that and get that nice in the pocket strum with the chuck. If you don't have your chucking down, you can do it without it. Down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down. Here comes the change to A7. See, it sounds better with the chuck, a little more interesting. Right? Alright, so that'll give you practice with those 3 7th chords. Let's do the same thing, but let's change the key. Or we're going to change the chords. Let's change to the key of A. So in the key of A, we're going to play the basically an A7th. Then it goes to the 4 chord, which is a D7. Then the 5 chord is E7. Okay? So you basically do the same exact pattern, and it's going to sound similar, but the key changes because we're going to A. So you do first thing you do is you do your 4 bars on the A7. Same strum. Now I got to change the D7 for 2 bars, 2 measures. Back to A7 for 2. Now I go to E, D to A, E for the turnaround, back to A. And that repeats, right? So try it in different keys. That's it in the key of A, where the chords are the 1 chord, the A7 to the D7, and then the 5 would be your E7. But use the same pattern. That pattern stays the same. That's a standard in music. 1, 4, 5, 12 bar or 8 bar. That pattern always stays the same, so you want to memorize that. 4 measures on the 1 chord, 2 measures on the 4 chord, 2 measures on the 1 chord, and so on and so forth. I'll give it to you one more. Let's practice our G7. How about we do it in the key of D? So the chords will be D7 will be the 1 chord. Then you got to go to a G7. And then the 5 chord will be the A7. All right, now if any of these changes are hard, like you might have, for instance, the first one did trouble going to that B7. The B7 is a tough one to get to at first. So just go back and forth between like the A7 and the B7, right? And practice the mechanics of the change one at a time, back and forth, and this is training you on good technique. Keep your fingers close to the fretboard, okay? Not flying out this way. Always keep your hand like a magnet is drawing your fingers to the strings. Always have your fingers in tight. I don't want to see the pinky way out here or your hand flailing about. You only want to get like a credit card in between the strings and the tips of your fingers when you're making your changes, okay? So D7th, we got to go from the D7th to the G7th. So you might have to practice that change back and forth a few times to get that. Let's try it. 1, 4, 5, and then the 5 chord in the key of D would be your A7. So you have D7, G7, and A7. Let's try it in D. Why not? Let's have some fun. 4 measures, 4 bars. Now we got to change it to G7. I like that change. Back to the D7. Now we got to go to the A7. 5 chord to the G7. Back to the D7. A7 for the turnaround. Back to the beginning. 4 bars or 4 measures on the D7. Here we go to G7. Back to the D7. Now the 5 chord to A7, G, 4 chord, D7. A7 for turnaround. And that's it. That's it in the key of D. Okay, so I wanted to give you some practice on these 7th chords, and you have a nice 1, 4, 5, 12 bar blues there to mess around with these 7 chords. So play, mess around with it, have fun. And also, try some of those other song titles I gave you to throw these 7th chords. They're very important chords, and these are dominant 7ths. They have a flat 7th, root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7th. You'll learn exactly what those intervals mean when we get to chord construction, okay? I don't want to bog you down with too much theory at first. I want to get you playing and having fun, and then we'll bring the theory into it. We're learning a little bit at a time so we don't overwhelm you. Okay, but theory is important. But we'll break it down and we'll make it easy, okay? So I want you to learn all these 7ths, dominant 7ths, use them in your playing, and have fun. Remember, practice the right things and keep developing that ear. And I will see you in the next lesson. Take care.